Okay, tonight we are continuing in our study from Titus, and we are looking once again at the first chapter, and we'll look at the 6th verse, and we're going to try to move through this as quickly as we can, because what he's talking about here is the qualifications for elders and pastors and overseers, and we believe, and bishop, and as we've already discussed this, we believe that it is all the same thing. They're the same thing. And so in these next verses here, we're going to start right there with chapter or verse 6. And it says there that if a man is blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of disputation or insubordination. And I think that'll be enough probably for tonight. But we'll look at this, and the first thing that he mentions there is blameless. And I think that really what he's talking about is that there is no charge or accusation against that person. All right? In other words, it's not talking about being perfect. All right? It didn't say, that, but I believe that he doesn't have any moral or spiritual charge against that person. And because the thing is that person who is called to that place of leadership should be a godly leader and should be able to lead his life or lead others by his own life example. I think that we have to remember that a pastor is not only a leader, but he's also has a servant's heart, and also we're going to talk about stewardship also. The next thing it talked about is what we have been spending already some time talking about this, but we're going to try to move quickly through this because we have mentioned so much about this. But that is, the next part says, the husband of one wife. And as I've already talked about this, I believe that this is how I believe that it's often misinterpreted. And I think it's timely to just try to gain a little bit of understanding about what Paul is not teaching. First of all, Paul is not talking about polygamy. And I think that that's obvious, that he's not talking about a person that's got 2 or 3 wives. But I believe that elders should only be married to only one woman at one time. To me, really, that's the foundational truth of that particular passage to me. I truly believe that. I believe that Paul is not saying that you must be married. I don't believe that. I believe because Paul himself was not married. And if we can go to Acts chapter 13 and look at verse 1, and we'll see that Paul himself was an elder in Antioch. And he was not a pastor. He was an elder in Antioch, and he was before becoming an apostle. I believe that I firmly believe that Paul is not referring to divorce, if it is biblical divorce. So this is my own personal opinion, based on the study of Scripture. I believe that a deacon or a pastor could be divorced if it was for biblical grounds. And in Scripture I looked this up and studied this, but the Bible gives 2 clear grounds for divorce, and number 1 is sexual immorality. That's found in Matthew 5:32. And then in 1 Corinthians 7:12 through 15, after close examination, you study that, it's abandonment by an unbelieving partner. Abandonment by an unbelieving partner. And I understand what the discussion is about in 1 Corinthians 7:12 through 15 about staying with an unbeliever. I understand that. But I'm saying if that unbelieving partner abandons you, then that is biblical grounds for divorce, according to what I can glean from this teaching. Those are the two things that I find. So there is, for me, that if God is ordained for those two reasons, then that I believe that a pastor, elder, deacon could be divorced. Now, what Paul is referring to is this, is that the man must be faithful to the woman who is his wife. I said it last week. I believe that what Paul is referring to here is a one-woman man. And I'm talking about, you all know what I mean by one-woman man. I'm not going to sing you no song or anything like that, no country western song. But that is the truth, one-woman man, that he is faithful to the woman who is his wife. And I believe that the kind of faithfulness he's talking about is found in Matthew 5:28, that he is faithful both in his actions and his thoughts. And so we could get into quite a discussion about what Jesus taught about adultery. He said that a person could commit adultery by having lust in their heart and all that. And that's exactly what it teaches us in Matthew 5:28. Some teachers go as far to say that a man who has committed some sexual sin, who may, for instance, have an illegitimate child or some other stain on his life, should never allow it to become a pastor. And there are examples from the Old Testament where God would not allow ungodly men to enter a role of leadership. So in other words, so let's pause there. So I kind of rushed through that. But what it's saying is that I don't believe that God would be calling a person. I'm not making a qualification out of it. You see what I'm saying? I'm not. In fact, perhaps I'm making a judgment. And maybe I shouldn't do that. But I'm saying I would not understand. Let me put it that way. I would not understand why that God would call someone into the ministry that had this kind of stain on their lives. And some of you can say, well, I know a person. Absolutely, we all know a person. We all know a pastor that has, some stain on their life that has become, pastor. I understand all that. But for me, it's difficult to understand, and I would give you Old Testament examples, all right? For example, David was not allowed to do all the things that God had called him to do because of the ungodliness that he had done. So I look at that, but not just that example, but there's other examples. Now I'm going to give you a qualification here, okay? So because not everybody is called to be a pastor. Not everybody's called to do that. Not everybody's called to be an overseer or to lead a church. And but I understand that we live under grace. We live under the new covenant. I understand that. I understand that we are all saved sinners under grace. I understand that we are equal in the eyes of God. And I believe that there is no superiority of character. In other words, I don't believe that a pastor is superior to any other Christian. Now, as far as their office, and there is a scriptural teaching about how that when it comes to the time of reckoning, that a pastor will have to have a greater weight upon their responsibility. I understand that. But what we're talking about, I understand that, a person who is saved and all, certainly if they felt like that they're being called to the ministry, I would not judge. I personally, if I was sitting on that committee, would not judge them if they testified of their calling and their commitment to the Lord and all of that. But yet it makes you wonder when I look at some of the restrictions that God put upon certain men in the Bible. With Moses and David, Abraham. We can look at so many others. Because of disobedience, then they were not allowed to do certain things. So it's something to think about. I know you all know someone, so you don't have to tell me. I know that we all know someone that has done something in the past. And I often tell you about the young pastor that was pastoring our church at Newside over there at Monad, and how that he, as a pastor, had committed, immorality. But the way I understand it, his wife did not divorce him. And I also understand that he continued in the ministry after a time, okay? That's the way I understand it, after a time. But anyway, because I'm not going to go ahead and keep repeating that about being superior, because there is no one greater sin than another. However, that is truth. However, the one thing that God mentions here is sexual sin, and also he does mention that. All right, we try to get past that because it doesn't get any easier. Because look what the next one says. It says, having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination. The second qualification for eldership is that, about family leadership. And he says you've got to have faithful children. And when he talks about dissipation, he's talking about drunkenness or sexual misconduct. And so I would have to agree that perhaps he is talking about older children. He's talking about older children. And maybe that is a cop-out, because I know that younger children are often disobedient. My goodness, when they get up to be 16, 17 years old, that 17-year-old, oh my goodness. Both of our children, when they got to be 17, it was almost like, both saved. They were both saved. I'm going to tell you, my children are saved, okay? And when you study the commentaries, that's what he's talking about. When he talks about home leadership, what is my greatest responsibility in the home? My children get saved. That's right. I stand on that. I understand that. And both children were saved before I ever went into the ministry. So I'm just saying. But for some, that would be exactly what he's talking about here. And that he is talking about as far as church home leadership. Because the truth is, we know then that there are prodigal sons and prodigal daughters, aren't there? Prodigal sons and prodigal daughters. We're talking about now older children. And I can have the greatest influence in the world that I can upon them, but still they will make choices and all that do not reflect how they were taught and brought up in the home. But it also tells us in Scripture that they will return to that teaching, to that when they were brought up that way, if they were truly saved. So anyway, really, for some, there might be a qualification there that the pastor's children must be saved. That might be a qualification. I'm not sure that I have ever seen that in a church. However, without going off too far, but I have seen, and I think some of you mentioned this last week, where I have seen a pastor or a deacon that felt like they should resign because of the waywardness of their children. And they would give this statement, and maybe that's what they need to do. See what I'm saying? Maybe that's what they need to do. Just step down and take care of their family. I was talking with a man, and he was a kind of a counselor to pastors, if you would. And he counseled pastors and all, and he was talking about that very thing. That sometimes a pastor who is struggling with family in the way that I'm talking about. Their family is going through issues and not living the way they should, and on and on and on. He stepped down or take a sabbatical to deal with that family, to help, to help that family themselves, to counsel that family and all. So there are instances where I believe that's absolutely biblical, absolutely. I didn't say it was a qualification. I said I believe that perhaps sometimes that's what needs to be done. That's no different than a pastor. I went to a pastor's conference, and there was some pastors there, and there was one who had been struggling with some kind of issues in his life. I believe it was over anxiety, and he told us at that time it wasn't immorality or anything like that. But he was struggling, and he was promoting the idea of a sabbatical. So in other words, a pastor would take off for a year and not lose their not lose their church, but be able to take off. Maybe not a year, but for a period of time, that they would be able to take off and be able to go to church where they wanted to, and be able to not have to be at the church. I forget how many times it is, 2,000 times a year. You know what I'm saying? Not that many times, or whatever it is, 3 times a week. And so I think that is something to consider. And I'm not talking about a vacation. We're not talking about that. We're talking about literally a sabbatical. And that he would not be judged for. And, well, there's something wrong with the pastor, or he's got some kind of problems that he took off. See, that's not going to help. So that's not going to help the pastor. I'm not being ugly. I'm just telling you the truth. A pastor who needs a sabbatical, or I think should be given a sabbatical, then it would be with the church's blessings. Our pastor is taking a sabbatical, and he's going to be back here in June the 19th or whatever of next, or something like that, instead of being negative and saying, well, he's got some kind of problems at home and he needs to take off. That doesn't help anybody. Certainly doesn't help the pastor. You know why the pastor doesn't ask for sabbatical? It's that very reason. Yeah, he can't handle the job. He can't take it. He's whatever. So anyway, sometimes I think about how many relationships between a church and a pastor could be healed through that kind of working together. Well, went to I've gone to all kinds of workshops and meetings trying to learn how to be the best leader and a person possibly can. But I went to another meeting one time, and it was called literally Peacemakers, and how that the pastor should be peacemaker within the church. And I walk away from that meeting thinking about how many church members should be part of that kind of a conference and kind of a meeting, that would learn to work together and work side by side with the pastor and all. But anyway, that I believe that's what he's talking about there. We'll kind of move on. I want to get through the rest of these. And then it says, verse 7 says, for a bishop must be blameless as a steward of God, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money. When we think about in this society, a steward is one who managed a household. And I think that's a good way to think about a pastor. Managed a household on behalf of the owner. You took care of the house while the owner is away. Woo! If you want to ask me what my definition of being a pastor is, I just gave it to you. But he's coming back, and I pray he's coming soon. Pastor was asking me that today. How much longer? How much longer? I don't know. I do believe, get off on another subject, and y'all may all disagree, but I don't believe that God is going to come back according to how bad we get. Y'all can think about that. Y'all can think about it. We're just going to get, the country and the world is just going to get so bad that the Lord is going to come back. I believe that God knew when he was going to come back when he created us. And also, as I know Ray believes, I believe it all has to do with how Israel deals with all the things that's going to happen with Israel. So you watch over there, you watch what's happening in Israel, you get the Israeli newspaper, and you watch that place, and you'll have a better idea about if it's time for the Lord to come back. I don't think it's anywhere in Scripture where it says that, we're going to become so bad. He's already done that once. He said, when are you going to do it no more? He said, I'll destroy this people and build me another people. He's already done that. He's already promised he's not going to ever do that again. So anyway, but she was asking me that this morning, and then all of a sudden she did. She said, well, I wonder if it has something to do with Israel. Well, anyway, the manager of a household, that manager of a household, the overseer is to look at the church the same way. We are responsible to spiritually feed, lead, train, counsel, discipline, and encourage church members. And guess what? I can give you the scripture for it. We're held accountable for all that we do. As a pastor, I am held accountable for what I do or fail to do. But I'm looking for the reward that comes from that. It tells us that we're not to be self-willed. We are to put our own wills aside. We're to put our own desires aside and seek after God's will for our life. Not quick-tempered. This is not just me, but this does not refer to quick outbursts of anger. That's not what it's referring to. But we're talking about anger that is easily provoked. I just put in a short note there, a short fuse. We shouldn't have a short fuse. We should not be addicted to wine. And there was quite a discussion when I was looking at this part of the verse about what wine is. And it gives that example about some wine was not even alcoholic in the old days, and it talks about the difference between wine that's in wine cases and old wine cases and all that. But I think that I believe that what he's referring to, just make a statement real quickly here, we're going to get this done. Paul is referring to any consumption of wine that would cause an elder to lose mental alertness and good judgment. I'll just put it out there that way. That's the way I believe. I believe that's what the Scripture is teaching. Each one of you need to take these verses yourself and make your own calls and own judgments on that. But that's what I believe that he is saying. He's saying not violent. In other words, not prone to get into fights. I'm serious. That's what I believe it means. I believe he's talking about not getting into fights. I believe that he's talking not to be quarrelsome. He's talking about not only physically, but also abusive with cruel words. We must be, as I already said, a peacemaker, one who is ready to settle disagreements peacefully without retaliation. It goes on to say there, not greedy for money. And I believe what he's talking about here is integrity. All right? Integrity about, the wealth that he has. You don't have to seek wealth or financial prosperity at any cost. Now, I believe that's what he's talking about. So there is one part here. It looks like we're going to have to quit. But I do have that note. So we're going to go ahead and I want you to look at Luke chapter 10. We're going to get this last note in because I already mentioned that. Luke chapter 10, verse 7. Okay, well, I'm going to say it while you're looking. All right, so I believe that all Christians, including pastors, have a right to make a living for themselves and for their family. Now, y'all did hear that. All Christians, as well as pastors, have a right to make a living for themselves and their families. And because we're talking about not greedy for money. So you look at Luke chapter 10. Because I was told one time by a man that a pastor shouldn't be paid. And Luke chapter 10 and verse 7, and it says, and remain, now I know that, I understand this is out of context, but they sent 70 men out, to preach or whatever, and he was telling them, giving them instructions. And this was Jesus himself. And remain in the same house, eating and drinking such things as they give, for the labor is worthy of his wages. All right? So, and I've seen that scripturally done in this church. I've seen it done in Romania. I've seen it done, at workshops where, people would ask, the pastor to come in. Some of y'all remember always doing that. Whenever, y'all can remember doing that. Well, not all of you, but many of you can. The evangelist would come. You'd ask him to your house many times. And, and we went to Romania. We had a choice. We could stay with those people over there in their homes. And some people did. Some people stayed with the families. That's what that scripture is saying. That's what it's saying right there. And so that's where that comes from. If you're wondering, well, where did that come from where the pastor goes and eats, I don't want to be, we understand we're teaching in context. We're not teaching our personal life here. Y'all do understand that, okay? I'm not talking about my own personal pastorship. But that's the deal where on Sunday, the pastor is often asked out, for lunch or dinner or that. That's scriptural. See what I'm saying? That's absolutely scriptural. And then I have another one, 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And then verse 11. Some of you may serve on a pulpit committee someday, and you'll be thinking about these passages of Scripture. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 11 I have down. It says, well, what do you think about that verse? If we have sown, Paul is talking about his missionary team. If we have sown spiritual things for you, is it a great thing if we reap your material things? And then verse 14 says, even so the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. Should live from the gospel. I said, you don't get any of that personal stuff out of your thoughts tonight, because I'm not talking about this church or me to any kind of relationship to this church, okay? We're talking about any pastor. Pastor not only has a right to earn a living, but has a right to be paid by those to whom he ministers. Okay, go to 1 Peter. We're going to end it. Go to 1 Peter chapter 5, because he sums it up really nicely. 1 Peter chapter 5. And verses 1 through 4. I'll go ahead and read while y'all hunting. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. The elders who are among you I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. This is to me. Shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but by willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you'll receive the crown of glory that does not fade